Hi, this is Jackie here with the Sexy Politico, giving you a quick and dirty podcast using my phone as opposed to my mic and everything all set up nice and pretty. If you like the Sexy Politico podcast, please subscribe and check out all of our other social media. All that links and stuff will be in your podcast description. This month is International Women's Month. Yesterday was International Women's Day, and I have a house full of sick boys, and I'm sick myself. So that's why this podcast is a little bit late and a little bit roughshod. So International Women's Day is something that I personally did not have any knowledge of or any experience with until I went overseas and I was in the Peace Corps in Bulgaria. And it feels like something brand new, but International Women's Day was recognized by the European Union as a holiday on March 8th, and it's an official holiday to honor the economic and social leaps that women have made. There are events in the United States as well, and we honor International Women's Day. They also honor the suffragettes, but in 2011, it was actually the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day, which is crazy to think about how this holiday feels like it's brand new, although it's really old as well. It's probably because of social media. I mean, social media has changed the landscape of holidays that feel real and holidays that feel fake. And I mean, when you can hashtag International Women's Day or hashtag International Women's Month on your social media platforms, it makes things, makes things sound pretty cool, But when we're looking at International Women's Day in the United States specifically, most of the time you see these pictures of CEOs or women in power, and you're like, this and hashtag International Women's Day, and especially with the Me Too movement and things of that nature, there's been this emphasis on women gaining new roles and new positions of leadership. But lately I've been reading a lot of things on domestic history and history back home. I'm currently reading the Astronauts' Wives Clubs, and I think that when we are looking at International Women's Day, we also need to remember not just the Kamala Harrises and the people who are gaining political, social, and business power. We need to remember that women's history also is domestic history, and that is the hidden history that we forget about in this country, and that historians are only recently trying to find more information on. What do I mean by domestic history? What I mean by domestic history is that hidden history that's at home. Things such as, how did the 1960s women's liberation movement happen? How did women have the time? Now, let's take a task such as doing the laundry. Before we had electricity, before we had the washing machine, if you look at any domestic history book, it will tell you that the laundry took 7 days to do. Women were constantly just doing the laundry. It took all day to cook and clean, and as labor-saving devices were invented, as more homes were put on the grid, as more electrical items became part of our everyday lives, that is when women were able to become part of women's liberation movements. You ever think about and you wonder why the early suffragettes were mostly women of means? And that's because they had maids. They had people in their homes that were able to do work for them that a regular housewife of the time just wouldn't have had time to go and march up and down the street, because she was expected to be at home taking care of the kids and doing the damn laundry, which probably by 1910, 1911, they had the ability to bring water into the house, so that, that cut off half a day's worth of work, but it still took 3 days plus, not every house even to this day still has an electric dryer in it. Now, as we move forward in time and we move into the 50s and 60s, and you have this relaxing of social pressures and social mores and things of that nature, and the fact that I'm a stay-at-home mother and I don't iron my husband's shirts. Why? Because he doesn't give a shit. He doesn't. He does not give a shit that I don't iron his shirts or in his pants. But this domestic history is what really changed the course of women's lives and made it so women have the ability to go into political office because they have the time. Now, it's not just domestic history that brought women to this place of tapping on the glass ceiling and almost breaking it, but not quite there yet. We also have had legal cases that have helped women have economic freedom that they did not have before. I mean, in some countries, you legally became your spouse when you got married, and some married women took advantage of this. You can find notices, especially in Great Britain, of women racking up huge amounts of debt, and at that point in time, she wasn't, Sally Smith. She was Mrs. Robert Smith, and any debt that Mrs. Robert Smith made, Robert Smith was in charge of, and so she'd go around, racking up charges all over town and then disappear. And so Robert Smith was there to flip the bill for his wife. But in reality, what this created was economic dependence and made it so that women could not leave. I mean, you literally were your father's property, then you became your husband's property. And if you had a son, if your husband passed away before you did, your son was in charge of you. In the U.S., you had a little bit more freedom if you were a single person, but still, it wasn't until the 60s and 70s that women could open charge cards and have bank accounts in their own names without anybody else signing for them. Luckily now, the only time somebody else has to sign for you to get a bank account is when you're a minor, and that's the way it probably should be. Now, with this economic freedom and more time because of labor-saving devices, this has allowed women to have this space to grow, to bring more money into their family, and to not need this large differentiation between men's work and women's work, and especially when women's work wasn't even appreciated anyway. So as we celebrate International Women's History, International Women's Month, let's not forget the women at home in the domestic sphere who kept it all together. And let's not forget these women, because International Women's History should not just remember the CEOs, the politicians, and the people who are reaching for the top. Women's history is all women's history. It doesn't matter your background. So I would like to give 3 cheers for all women in all walks of life, and remember all women and all women's work. Well, that is it for this week's Politico podcast. I'm sorry for it being so rough and ready, but I wanted to do something for y'all this week. I'm going to work on something a little bit more polished for next week. thank you again for listening. If you have any questions, any comments, please leave them on any of our social medias. And thanks again for listening. Have a great day. Stay safe. Stay sexy. Bye.